Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a concept that, well, it kind of underpins everything, from the smallest cell right up to global society. It's called recyclability.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you probably think you know recycling, right? Blue bin, bottles, paper.
Yeah, usual stuff.
But we're about to look at it in a whole new way, almost like a new science that takes it way beyond just waste management.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We're talking about recyclability as this inherent capacity that any complex system has.
Mm-hmm.
Think ecosystems, organisms, even societies.
Okay.
It's their ability to efficiently, restore, renew, reintegrate their own parts, matter, energy, information.
So it's like the system's ability to heal itself.
Yeah.
And adapt.
Precisely. When a system is good at this, it flourishes. When it loses that ability, well, it degrades. Simple as that, really.
And our mission today is to take a really fresh look at this, almost like using X-ray vision to see the patterns, the rules that govern renewal everywhere.
Right. And we're doing that through what we're calling the triad of analogy, drawing lessons from three really different realms.
Okay, what are they?
First, ecological and industrial systems. So nature's perfect loops versus our often messy human ones.
Uh-huh.
Second, biological systems, looking at how life itself, our bodies, other creatures, constantly repair and regenerate. It's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And finally, sociocultural systems, applying these ideas to how human societies change, renew themselves, keep going.
And, this isn't just thinking out loud. Understanding these universal laws of renewal, as you put it, could genuinely help us build better futures, more resilient, fairer, more sustainable.
Absolutely.
So get ready for maybe a few aha moments. It might just reframe how you see everything from, pollution to politics.
Let's hope so.
Okay, let's start unpacking this. Where better to begin than with nature? The ultimate master of recycling. Billions of years of practice.
Absolutely. You look at a natural ecosystem, the nutrient cycle there, that's the gold standard. It's this constant dance, transferring energy and matter. But the key thing is, energy flows through the system, one way. But matter, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, all the essentials, they cycle. Endlessly. That's what sustains life.
So what's the secret sauce? What makes nature so perfectly, waste-free?
It's the complete integration. When something dies, this huge, unseen army of decomposers gets to work. Fungi, bacteria, earthworms, the works. They break down all that complex organic stuff back into simple nutrients, which the plants then take up, and boom, the cycle starts again. There's literally no waste in that model. It's all just raw material.
Like Carl Linnaeus said, right? The death of one thing should always be subservient to the restitution of another.
Exactly. That sums it up perfectly.
Yeah.
It's a closed loop, almost totally efficient, powered by the sun, running on its own internal logic.
Yeah.
Beautiful, really.
It really is. But then you look at us, human industrial society, and we've basically done the exact opposite for centuries.
The linear model.
Yeah, make waste, extract it, manufacture something, use it, dump it, and the numbers are just staggering. Global waste going from 2.3 billion tons now to maybe 3.8 billion by 2050.
It's mind-boggling and unsustainable, fundamentally.
In the U.S. alone, 146 million tons into landfills every year?
Yeah, numbers like that. It really wasn't until the late 80s that people started seriously challenging this with industrial ecology.
Right.
They started asking that key question. Why can't our industrial system work like an ecosystem, where one company's waste is another's resource, shifting towards closed loops?
Which leads us straight into the circular economy idea that Ellen MacArthur Foundation talks about 3 core principles, right?
Yeah.
Driven by design.
Yes. First, design out waste and pollution from the start. Second, keep products and materials circulating, keep them in use at their highest possible value. And third, regenerate natural systems.
It's way beyond just reduce, reuse, recycle. It's adding things like repair, refuse, repurpose.
It's a whole system redesign, and we actually see it working in places like the Kalundborg Eco-Industrial Park in Denmark. That's a classic example.
How does that work?
Well, you have, say, a power plant providing excess heat to other factories or even homes. A biology plant's waste gets turned into biogas for a refinery. Pharmaceutical sludge becomes fertilizer for farmers.
So they're literally turning waste streams into revenue streams.
Exactly. It's called industrial symbiosis. Waste equals food. But, what's really fascinating when you compare nature's perfection with our effort so far, it boils down to what we call informational fidelity.
Informational fidelity. What do you mean?
Nature's system is exquisite. It's decentralized, sure, But the information flows perfectly. The decomposers know what to do. The plants know what to take up. It's like a high-definition instruction manual embedded everywhere.
Okay.
Our human systems, they're fragmented. We lose information constantly. What's this plastic actually made of? Can it be reused? Where did it end up? This gap, this loss of information, that's the fidelity efficiency gap.
We lose the recipe.
We lose the recipe, exactly. We don't know how to put things back together properly.
So the whole circular economy project, then, is really about fixing that gap, deliberately engineering those connections, those feedback loops that nature just has.
Precisely. It's a fundamental redesign. Products, consumption, logistics, everything, to make sure that recipe, that information, isn't lost, so materials can keep cycling at their highest value.
It's an architectural challenge.
It is. And this idea, engineering high-fidelity feedback loops for recycling, keep that in mind. It's going to be crucial when we start talking about societies.
Okay, so we've seen nature's grand scale. Let's zoom right in now to the individual level, because our own bodies apparently are regeneration machines too. It's like recyclability is built right in.
Oh, absolutely. Biological regeneration is all about renewal, restoration, tissue growth.
Yeah.
It's what makes living things resilient. Every species does it to some extent, though. It varies wildly.
And it's different from making a whole new organism, right?
Totally different from reproduction. A planarian worm regrows its head, sure.
Yeah.
But for us, it's mostly about repairing parts within our own bodies.
Yeah.
And there's a whole spectrum. At the very top, you've got complete regeneration.
Yeah.
Think salamander regrowing a whole leg bone, muscle, nerves, skin, everything. Or that flatworm regrowing its brain. Incredible.
Wow.
Then there's compensatory regeneration. That's big in humans, especially the liver. You can remove maybe 2/3 of it, and the rest grows back to full size and function. Perfect restoration.
The liver is amazing.
Isn't it? Pancreas, kidneys, lungs do it too, but to a lesser extent. And then the most common type for us is just tissue repair and renewal. Skin healing a cut, bones knitting, making new blood cells constantly. That's happening all the time.
So how does it work? How does the body know what to rebuild?
Well, that goes back to information. Successful regeneration needs access to the original blueprint. It's fundamentally an information management problem.
Right, the recipe again.
Exactly. Different strategies are used. The salamander, it can basically hit reset on cells near the wound, turn them back into embryonic-like cells, and rebuild perfectly. We mammals, well, we mostly can't do that.
So what do we do?
Our liver, for instance, relies on its existing cells just making faithful copies of themselves until the job's done. High-fidelity replication. And for day-to-day stuff like skin or blood, we have adult stem cells constantly replacing worn-out ones.
Okay, let's take a contrast within our own bodies then to really see these different levels. Like you get a bad cut on your arm, it heals, but you get a scar, right? And that scar tissue, it isn't the same. It doesn't have hair or sweat glands. Maybe it's weaker.
Exactly. That's incomplete regeneration. It's a patch job, basically.
Okay.
Compare that to the liver we just talked about. It regenerates functionally perfectly. No scarring. Full function restored. It's amazing orchestration. And this contrast just hammers home the point. Regeneration is an informational challenge. Success hinges on the system's ability to keep, find, and execute the right blueprint. That informational fidelity again.
So the salamander, it knows where the cut was.
It has incredible positional information. If you cut off its hand at the wrist, it knows to regrow a hand, not suddenly sprout an elbow there. The liver. High-fidelity copying of existing units.
Okay, this next point, this really pulls it together for me. So human skin scarring, that's a failure of informational fidelity.
In a way, yes, it's a lower fidelity patch.
Yeah.
The priority is closing the barrier quickly, not perfect reconstruction. The detailed information for things like hair follicles, it's lost or ignored in that rapid repair process.
So the better a system manages its own structural information, the better its recyclability.
And go. And that concept, informational fidelity, determining the quality of renewal, gives us a really powerful lens. Think about social systems now. What acts as the blueprint there? Things like cultural memory, institutional knowledge, social norms.
Fascinating. Okay, but this amazing ability to regenerate, it doesn't last forever, does it? We age, things break down.
No, it's not infinite. And aging, that decline in regenerative ability, isn't just random failure. It's actually rooted in fundamental physics. A living thing is this tiny, improbable island of order in a universe that's constantly tending towards disorder. The second law of thermodynamics.
So aging is kind of the slow, inevitable win for entropy.
You could put it that way. And recycling, regeneration that's life's active, energy-burning fight against that decay. The limits to regeneration are ultimately the limits of life against physics.
So what are the biological mechanisms that enforce those limits?
Well, a key one is something called cellular senescence. Basically, cells entering a state of stable, irreversible retirement. They stop dividing.
Why do they do that?
It's often triggered by damage, like DNA damage, or importantly, when telomeres get too short. And these senescent cells, they pile up in our tissues as we get older.
Okay.
Now, here's the twist. In the short run, senescence is actually a good thing. It's a powerful anti-cancer mechanism. It stops potentially damaged cells from multiplying out of control. Think of it as an emergency brake.
A safe shutdown.
Right. But the long-term buildup of these zombie cells, as they're sometimes called, is bad news. They don't just sit quietly. They secrete this nasty cocktail of inflammatory signals.
The SASP, right. Senescence-associated secretory phenotype.
That's the one. And this SASP creates chronic, low-grade inflammation. It messes up tissue function, harms healthy neighboring cells, impairs stem cells.
So it actually hinders regeneration in the long run and promotes scarring instead.
Exactly. It becomes a major driver of aging and the decline in our ability to repair ourselves properly. And a fundamental trigger for cells hitting that retire button is telomere attrition. Telomeres are these protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes, like the plastic tips on shoelaces.
Right.
But because of how DNA copies itself, a little bit of that telomere gets lost every single time a cell divides.
So they get shorter and shorter, like a clock ticking down.
Precisely. It acts as a mitotic clock, limiting the number of divisions. When they get critically short, the cell senses it as major DNA damage and triggers senescence or even self-destructs.
And that contributes to aging by using up stem cells.
That's a huge part of it. Stem cell exhaustion. And while genetics plays a role in starting length, lifestyle matters too. Chronic stress, obesity, smoking they seem to speed it up. Exercise might slow it down.
So pulling this together, regeneration isn't free. It costs energy, obviously, but it also carries risk.
Huge risk. Every time a cell divides, there's a tiny chance of error, a mutation. Accumulate enough mutations, you get cancer, which is, catastrophic system failure for the organism.
So senescence and telomere shortening, they aren't just bugs, they're features.
Exactly. They're incredibly sophisticated, evolved risk management strategies. It's a fundamental trade-off. The system gives up the potential for infinite cell division to protect the whole organism.
How so?
Telomere shortening is like a preset limit to stop cells dividing too many times and accumulating too many dangerous mutations. Senescence is the emergency brake for cells that do get damaged. It's a calculated evolutionary bet. Favor a controlled, gradual decline aging over the massive risk of uncontrolled proliferation cancer.
That's a really profound insight. This trade-off between renewal, plasticity, and the risk of instability or failure. And you're saying this might apply to social systems too. Things like institutional rigidity, cultural stagnation. Maybe they aren't just, people being stuck in their ways.
It suggests they could be emergent properties, maybe deep-seated, risk-averse safety mechanisms designed to prevent catastrophic social breakdown, even if it means sacrificing dynamism in the long run. It gives us a non-moralistic way to think about conservatism versus change.
Okay, let's pivot now and apply this lens directly to human society. We see this constant tension, don't we, between continuity and change. Societies need to pass on their core structures, but they also have to adapt.
Absolutely. And these two forces look remarkably like biological replication and regeneration.
So let's start with the change aspect. Cultural renewal. What is that exactly?
Think of it as society regenerating itself. Rejuvenating values, traditions, practices, so they stay relevant, stay vital. It's a collective repair job. Integrating new ideas, evolving. It's not about ditching the past, but reinterpreting it.
Can you give some examples of how that actually looks?
Sure. Think about conscious efforts to revive endangered languages, often using new tech, or adapting old rituals and festivals for new generations, or creatively reusing historic buildings for new purposes.
Right.
We see big examples like the Maori Renaissance in New Zealand from the 70s onwards. Facing cultural loss, they launched efforts to revive their language, customs, identity through things like immersion schools, land rights activism, really repairing the cultural fabric.
The Harlem Renaissance too?
A perfect example. A huge flourishing of African-American art, music, literature that reshaped identity. Even adaptive reuse in old industrial cities, turning factories into galleries or housing. That's a kind of physical cultural renewal. It shows a society's capacity for plasticity, for healing, for adapting its identity. Now, if renewal is about change and adaptation, the flip side is social reproduction. This is about continuity.
Keeping things the same.
Largely, yes. Drawing on sociologists like Pierre Bourdieu, it's about all the ways existing social structures, norms, and especially inequalities get passed down from one generation to the next. It's like the societal version of high-fidelity DNA copying, aiming for stability.
And education often plays a big role here, doesn't it? We think of schools as equalizers, but maybe they aren't always.
That's a major argument from reproduction theorists. Schools often transmit what Bourdieu called cultural capital.
Meaning?
Non-financial stuff. The right way of speaking, manners, cultural knowledge that the dominant group values. Kids from privileged backgrounds usually arrive with more of this. And the school system, often through its hidden curriculum, rewards that capital. It can end up sorting kids, subtly preparing working-class kids for working-class jobs, elites for elite roles. Bourdieu called it symbolic violence, making the existing order seem natural, even to those it disadvantages.
So social reproduction provides stability, which is necessary.
Absolutely necessary.
But if it becomes too rigid, too resistant to change when change is needed.
Then it becomes societal aging, sclerosis. You're just recycling outdated hierarchies, inequalities, inefficient ways of doing things. It makes a society brittle, unable to cope with new challenges. Like an organism full of senescent cells, it loses its regenerative capacity. But here's the deeper insight. Renewal and reproduction aren't really opposites fighting each other. They're two sides of how a society manages its inheritance, its information, its structure over time.
Like plasticity and fidelity in biology.
Exactly. Renewal brings in variation. Adaptations, that's plasticity. Reproduction ensures stability, continuity, that's fidelity. A healthy society, like a healthy organism, needs a dynamic balance between the two.
Because a system that only reproduces perfectly can't evolve. A society that just clones itself becomes rigid, fragile.
Right. It becomes a gerontocracy, unable to handle new things like climate change or tech disruption.
But conversely, a system with only variation, no fidelity, that's just chaos.
The total chaos. A society focused only on renewal, constantly tearing everything down without stable institutions. That descends into what sociologists call anomie, normlessness, incoherence.
This reframes so many historical conflicts, doesn't it? Political fights, cultural clashes. Often they seem to be struggles between these two imperatives. Progressives pushing for renewal, conservatives emphasizing high-fidelity reproduction.
It gives you a powerful analytical tool, and it highlights that both functions are essential. The real question isn't if we should change or preserve, but how do we find that dynamic sweet spot? How do we get adaptive innovation and a stable social order? And these processes, renewal and reproduction, they don't happen in a vacuum. They operate within a deeper framework, a kind of collective operating system, our worldview.
How does worldview affect recyclability?
Well, think about our concept of time.
Yeah.
In the West, the dominant model is linear time, past, present, future, a straight, irreversible arrow.
Right. That drives progress, innovation.
It does. But it also underpins the take-make-waste economy. If the past is gone and the future is just this resource to be exploited, there's less inherent reason to worry about closing loops or long-term consequences returning.
Okay. Versus
Cyclical time, common in many Eastern and indigenous cultures. Time moves in cycles: birth, growth, decay, rebirth, like the seasons, the moon, life itself.
That sounds inherently more aligned with recycling.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It emphasizes renewal, connection, seeing things holistically, living in harmony with finite cyclical planetary systems. It naturally fosters stewardship responsibility because what goes around comes around, literally.
So how do these big ideas, these worldviews, spread and stick in a society?
Well, for that, we can look at memetics, Richard Dawkins' idea from the 70s.
Memes, not just internet cats, right?
No, the original concept, memes as units of cultural information, ideas, beliefs, fashions, technologies, stories that replicate like genes.
How do they replicate?
Through social learning, imitation, teaching, stories, vertically, parent to child,
Yeah.
horizontally, peer to peer, obliquely from elders or teachers to the young.
And like genes, they change, compete.
Exactly. Variation, selection, retention. And crucially, Dawkins argued memes are selfish. Their goal is just to spread, whether or not they actually benefit us, their hosts.
So like hand washing is a useful meme.
The symbiotic meme, yeah. But a destructive cult ideology could also be a successful meme, spreading effectively even though it harms its carriers. A parasitic meme.
So memetics gives us a framework for how cultural information, including whole worldviews like linear or cyclical time, gets copied, passed on, recycled through a population.
Precisely.
Which leads to a fascinating point. A society's dominant worldview isn't just culture. It's like a fundamental setting, a system-level parameter.
That's a great way to put it. It's the operating system for everything else. Social, economic, political programs run on top of it.
So the meme of linear time actively encourages a one-way flow of resources, discourages thinking about consequences coming back around, creates a bias against circularity.
You could argue that, yes. While the meme of cyclical time inherently promotes the feedback thinking needed for sustainability. It assumes patterns repeat, consequences return, stewardship is necessary. It provides the cultural soil for things like regenerative farming or circular economies.
So real sustainability might need more than just new tech or policies. It might require a deep mimetic shift in our fundamental operating system.
It strongly suggests that. Moving from linear extraction to a cyclical, interconnected, regenerative logic. Redefining progress not as a straight lineup, but maybe as an upward spiral of renewal.
Okay, so what happens when these systems break down? When recyclability fails? In society, that often looks like deviance, conflict.
Right. Societies have norms, rules. Deviance is just breaking them. Why? Sometimes it's individual psychology, impulsivity, peer pressure, whatever.
But there are bigger patterns, too.
Sociological theories look at the system level. Merton's strain theory, for example. Deviance happens when society sets up goals, like wealth, but blocks the legitimate ways for some people to reach them. They innovate deviantly. It's a system failure. Ambition isn't recycled constructively.
Conflict theory sees it differently.
Yeah, more as a response to inequality. Laws are tools of the powerful, so deviance by the marginalized is a form of rebellion. But then structural functionalism says, hang on, deviance can be useful, it clarifies boundaries, and crucially, it can be a source of innovation, challenging bad rules.
So within our recyclability framework, rule breaking could be two things.
A dual lens, exactly. Like errors in copying DNA. Sometimes it's just a system glitch, a failure in passing on the norms correctly, a copying error. Society usually tries to correct it, maintain stability.
And the other possibility.
It could be a source of novelty, like a genetic mutation. It introduces new information, new ways of behaving. Most mutations are bad or neutral, but some are adaptive. So how a society responds, punish everything, or figure out how to test and maybe integrate useful innovations that shows its adaptive capacity.
Okay, so individual deviance is a glitch or maybe an innovation, but what about conflict between groups? That seems like a much bigger failure.
That's like a catastrophic failure of recycling between different social systems, where positive exchange just collapses into us versus them.
What drives that? Psychologically, it feels really deep-seated.
Though it is. Social identity theory tells us our self-esteem is tied to our groups. We naturally favor our in-group and are wary of out-groups. When our group feels threatened, that ramps up stereotyping, prejudice.
Realistic conflict theory adds the resource angle.
Right. Competition for scarce stuff, land, jobs, power fuels hostility. The famous Robbers Cave experiment showed that clearly with kids at summer camp.
And evolutionary psychology suggests some of this might be hardwired.
There are theories like the male warrior hypothesis, suggesting evolved tendencies for group-on-group aggression, historically perhaps for resources or mates. From our perspective, intergroup conflict is like the membranes around social groups becoming totally rigid, impermeable to healthy exchange. It defaults to a really primitive win-lose logic.
Losing all the potential benefits of cooperation of a social ecosystem.
Precisely. But here's a really critical point from this analysis. Intergroup conflict often isn't just random chaos. It can become a stable, self-perpetuating system, a kind of pathological homeostasis.
Meaning it keeps itself going, how?
Through reinforcing feedback loops. Think about it. Perceived threat from them strengthens our group identity and loyalty. That makes us favor us more, view them more negatively, maybe act aggressively, which they then perceive as a threat, strengthening their group solidarity, justifying their retaliation. And round it goes.
The conflict itself creates the conditions for more conflict.
Exactly, fueled by all those deep psychological biases.
So the system is still recycling, but it's recycling all the wrong things. Grievance, hostility, trauma, stereotypes.
Yes, each act of violence becomes feedstock for the next round. And these pathological loops can be incredibly stable, incredibly hard to break. That helps explain why some conflicts just grind on for generations.
Wow. So for conflict resolution, just sorting out the surface issues isn't enough.
Often, no. You have to break that underlying feedback loop of mutual animosity. Strategies like finding superordinate goals both sides want, but can only get by cooperating. Like in Robbers Cave, they work because they force a reshuffling of identities. They create a new, more inclusive us, shifting the system towards a constructive homeostasis.
Okay, let's shift from diagnosis to prescription then. If we understand these dynamics, how can we consciously engineer our systems, our societies, for better renewal? Governance seems key.
It is, and unfortunately, many of our current political models seem almost designed to fuel conflict, not resolve it.
Like adversarial, winner-take-all politics.
Exactly. It often frames everything as a zero-sum battle between us and them, discouraging cooperation and compromise.
But there are alternatives being explored, like deliberative democracy.
Yes, the idea that real political legitimacy comes from people reasoning together respectfully, giving justifications, trying to find common ground, rather than just exercising power.
And sortition, using lotteries, is a tool for that.
A key tool. Modern sortition uses random sampling, but stratified, to create citizens' assemblies that are like a mini public, demographically representative.
So you get regular people, not politicians.
Right. They learn about an issue from diverse experts, they deliberate together, and they produce recommendations. It's powerful because it cuts through partisan deadlock, gets past the usual conflict loops, and focuses people on the common good. There's a real deliberative wave happening globally, tackling tough issues this way.
What about when harm does happen? Crime, conflict? They damage the social fabric. Our usual justice system focuses on punishment.
Which often deepens the divisions, yeah. Restorative justice, or RJ, offers a completely different approach. It's about social wound healing, very aligned with regeneration.
How does it work?
Instead of asking what law was broken, who did it, what punishment do they deserve, RJ asks who was harmed. What are their needs? Whose obligation is it to meet those needs?
So it brings people together.
Typically, yes. Victims, offenders, community members, in a facilitated dialogue. The goal is understanding, accountability, repairing the harm, and reintegrating everyone. It's like guided social regeneration, aiming for full healing, not just a scar.
Does it work?
It shows great promise, especially in schools and youth justice, reducing reoffending, increasing victim satisfaction. And the principles underpin things like truth and reconciliation commissions, trying to heal whole nations after conflict by recycling that pain into understanding. Now, guiding all these regenerative processes in governance, injustice takes a certain kind of leadership, ethical leadership. Leaders committed to fairness, honesty, respect, accountability, the well-being of the whole community. They act like catalysts, like enzymes or signaling molecules in our biological analogy, facilitating positive renewal.
They build trust, mediate fairly, reinforce the good norms, provide a moral compass.
Exactly. Crucial for steering a society towards health when it could easily fall into division or decay.
Okay, let's apply this engineering mindset to the environment now. The climate crisis, resource depletion, that's a massive failure of industrial recyclability.
Monumental. Shifting requires applying those lessons from nature and biology directly to our economy and our farms.
Starting with the circular economy, how do we actually implement it?
It needs that systemic redesign we talked about. Governments play a huge role setting rules like extended producer responsibility, where manufacturers handle products end of life, setting waste targets, using green procurement, offering tax breaks or R&D funding for circular businesses.
And businesses need to change how they operate.
Totally. Designing products for durability, repair, disassembly, investing in remanufacturing, refurbishment, shifting to product as a service models. You lease the washing machine, the company takes it back. And building collaborative supply chains, that industrial symbiosis idea. But a quick caveat here. A truly circular economy relies on a lot of data sharing, tracking materials through complex networks. That creates vulnerabilities.
Like for fraud or manipulation.
Could be. So building trust requires not just material loops, but robust cybersecurity, data verification, transparent tracking systems alongside it. It's an information challenge too.
Makes sense. And then there's regenerative agriculture. This sounds like applying recyclability directly to the soil.
It is. It's about managing farmland, not just to sustain yields, but to actively regenerate the health of the soil and the whole farm ecosystem.
What does that involve?
Key practices are things like minimizing soil disturbance, less plowing, keeping the soil covered with cover crops, using diverse crop rotations, and often integrating livestock back onto the land to cycle nutrients naturally.
And the benefits.
They're huge. Healthier soil holds much more water. Better drought resilience. It sequesters more carbon from the atmosphere climate mitigation. It supports way more biodiversity. It's a win-win-win.
But shifting from industrial farming is hard.
Very. Farmers need support. Policies like grants or loan programs to help them through the transition years, which can be tricky financially. Technical support from universities and extension services. And importantly, market development, creating demand for regeneratively grown food through labeling, education, big companies committing to buy it.
So the goal is to boost the regenerative capacity of farmland itself, creating a food system that restores rather than depletes.
Exactly. Food security and ecological health, long term. But fixing our governance and environment isn't enough if we don't also evolve how we think, how we educate, what we value. Our current education systems often mirror that old linear industrial model, right?
Siloed subjects, yeah.
Often reinforcing existing structures rather than teaching kids how to think adaptively. So to equip people for the future, education needs a shift towards systems thinking, grounded in this kind of understanding of recyclability.
What would that look like? Teaching
Interconnectedness, how the economy affects the environment, affects equity, for example. Teaching feedback loops, understanding climate dynamics, or how social conflicts escalate. Teaching that fidelity plasticity balance the need for both stability and change, tradition and innovation.
So kids learn to see the whole picture, the dynamics, not just isolated facts.
Exactly. Giving them the mental tools to grapple with the messy, complex, interconnected problems we face, moving beyond simplistic linear thinking. And this connects to another huge challenge, balancing cultural preservation with adaptation. How does society hold on to its unique identity while still changing with the times?
Too much rigidity, you stagnate. Too much change, you lose your roots, your coherence.
Right. It's that fidelity-plasticity trade-off again.
So a regenerative approach means consciously managing that balance, like cultural recycling. How?
Well, strategies could include things like community-led initiatives, letting communities chart their own cultural future, using technology smartly, digital archives for endangered languages, social media to share oral histories, but also maybe using modern materials and traditional crafts, creating new contexts where old traditions can thrive economically or socially, and ensuring cultural diversity is represented in governance, globally too.
So the aim is to keep that historical thread, that identity, but ensure the culture stays alive, dynamic, adaptive.
Precisely. Not a museum piece, but a living system. And ultimately, all of this points towards, perhaps, a new kind of ethical framework, one that shifts away from just static rules towards a dynamic concern for the health and resilience of the systems we're part of.
So if we see ourselves as parts of these vast interconnected systems, ecological, biological, social, then our main moral job becomes stewardship.
That seems to be the implication. Responsible stewardship of those systems.
And this ethic would be grounded in that cyclical, interconnected view of reality we talked about. Key virtues would be
Stewardship, definitely. A deep sense of responsibility for system health, from local to global. Humility, recognizing complexity, knowing we can't control everything. Adaptability, the wisdom to know when to preserve and when to innovate, when to favor fidelity and when plasticity. And maybe, crucially, intergenerational justice.
Thinking long-term because consequences come back around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Understanding that in a cyclical system, our actions today directly shape the world our descendants inherit. That makes long-term thinking a core moral duty. This kind of ethic provides the foundation, the why, for working towards a truly recyclable human future.
Wow. We've covered a huge amount of ground today, really laying the foundations, as you said, for maybe a new way of looking at things. A science of human recyclabilities, drawing these analogies across ecosystems, organisms, societies. It does seem to reveal these underlying principles. Closed loops, informational fidelity being key, that constant tension between renewal and risk.
And it reframes our biggest problems. Climate change, inequality, conflict, as, fundamentally, failures of recyclability. It suggests a sustainable future depends on us learning from nature, yes, but also consciously engineering our own systems, social and biological, for renewal.
All those ideas we touched on, regenerative farming, deliberative democracy, restorative justice, circular economy, they aren't separate fixes. They're interconnected strategies to boost our collective capacity to recycle and regenerate at every level.
That's the hope.
So, the final thought for you, listening. What stands out to you from all this? Imagine a world where these principles of renewal weren't just ideas we discuss, but the conscious guiding ethos of our civilization.
Future work needs to dig deeper. Can we develop ways to measure social senescence? Metrics for a society's regenerative capacity? Can we run more real-world experiments with things like citizens' assemblies?
That's the vision, isn't it? A civilization that functions like a healthy ecosystem, perpetually renewing itself, turning waste into resources, conflict into understanding, challenges into catalysts for growth.
That's the promise, I think, of a truly recyclable human future.
This is DigitView.